Hey everybody, welcome back. We're so glad to be here, and now we are moving out to, the Titan of the West. This is the battlefield of Chickamauga. We're at Crawfish Springs right now. We're at the Gordon Lee Mansion, and we've got a lot to talk about here. But before we really get into the battle, we really need to bring the troops here. We need to talk about Crawfish Springs. We need to talk about some chow, and we got other things to talk about. We got three guests, one of whom is behind the camera. That's Chris Mikowski, Emerging Civil War. So let's start talking about this campaign a little bit with our good friend, historian of the Chattanooga and Chickamauga National Military Park, Jim Ogden.
Gary, thank you for coming out again, and thank you all for tuning in and listening. And as Gary said, we are here at Crawfish Springs, the historic name for this location today. It is part of the city of Chickamauga, Georgia. And this will be Rosecrans headquarters in the immediate period before the Battle of Chickamauga itself. But I want to bring the Union Army to the Chattanooga area. Chattanooga is important because of the passageways through the mountains. That's why the railroads are here. The common thing that you hear people talk about when they talk about why Chattanooga is important in the Civil War. But Chattanooga is first and foremost that doorway, gateway, passageway through the mountains to the ever-growing Confederate military-industrial complex in central Georgia and central Alabama. And the Union Army wants to get this passageway through the mountains to be able to thrust into Georgia to disrupt that military-industrial complex. And so, following the Kentucky campaign in 1862, the Union Army is reorganized, and it concentrates at Nashville under its new commander, William Stark Rosecrans, who in late December moved out and fought a battle outside of Murfreesboro, the Battle of Stones River, or Murfreesboro, after which Bragg retreats, allowing the Union Army to claim the victory. The two armies then will winter in Middle Tennessee, Rosecrans preparing his army now to advance on Braxton Bragg and win Chattanooga. In late June, he advanced from Murfreesboro, hoping to bring Bragg to battle somewhere in the Middle Tennessee area in the greater Tullahoma region, hoping to fight, defeat, destroy Bragg's army so that he could advance unopposed onto Chattanooga itself. But rain for 10 days meant that Rosecrans was not able to bring Bragg to battle, and Bragg slips away over the mountains and back into the fortified fastness around Chattanooga itself. And after another period of reorganization and planning and preparation, in mid-August, as the corn crop comes ripe, Rosecrans advances again and crosses the Tennessee River in the last days of August out to the west and southwest of Chattanooga, and sends two columns, one under George Thomas and the other under Alexander McCook, accompanied by the bulk of the Federal cavalry, southeastward over first the Sand Mountain Range and then the Lookout Mountain Range at intervals of 20 and 40 miles southwest of Chattanooga, with the idea of threatening Bragg's railroad supply line, that Western and Atlantic Railroad, which I understand you've heard some about in this series. Rosecrans wants to threaten that rail line and force Bragg to abandon the city of Chattanooga. And as Bragg realizes that Rosecrans is coming over Lookout Mountain 20 and 40 miles below Chattanooga, Braxton Bragg on September the 6th, what turned out to be William Stark Rosecrans' birthday, allowing me to joke that Bragg decides to give Rosecrans a birthday present, Braxton Bragg orders the city of Chattanooga abandoned. And on September 7th, 8th, and 9th, Bragg's army retreats out of southeast Tennessee, out of Chattanooga, and into North Georgia. And on the 9th day of September, some of Rosecrans' troops will occupy the city of Chattanooga. But the bulk of the Union Army is well south of Chattanooga, and Rosecrans is scattered over that mountainous terrain, and a reinforced Braxton Bragg with troops who have arrived from Mississippi and East Tennessee, not yet Virginia. Troops that have been sent to Bragg's army will embolden Braxton Bragg. He takes the offensive against Rosecrans in McLemore's Cove, south of us, and then near Lee and Gordon's Mill, but unsuccessfully. And Rosecrans, as he consolidates his army, begins to move back towards Chattanooga. And Braxton Bragg plans a new offensive, which he plans to execute on September the 17th. but then postpones a day. And from here at the Gordon home at Crawfish Springs, Rosecrans makes, in those couple of days before what turned out to be the Battle of Chickamauga, some of the most critical decisions. He did one of the most important things we can all do, and that is know thy enemy. Hold your friends close and your enemies closer. He did the E for enemy analysis in MET-T, and realized that Braxton Bragg might try to cut him off from the city of Chattanooga. And he begins to deploy small bodies of troops to guard important crossings over West Chickamauga Creek, downstream of his left flank at Lee and Gordon's Mill. And those critical decisions about how the next days would unfold were made by Rosecrans here at the Gordon home at Crawfish Springs as his army marches north out of McLemore's Cove and moves up closer towards Chattanooga.
That's great, Jim. I asked you to do this in about 5 minutes, and you did. By the way, you're with the American Battlefield Trust, and by the way, we know it's windy. We know we should have a windscreen on, and we do have a windscreen on. So you're welcome to comment on it, but we're doing the best we can. We can't control the weather, no matter how powerful the trust you may think we are. So we've got a lot to cover still at this site. We want to talk about some chow. We want to talk about some water. We got lots to talk about. Before we do, I just want to play off something Jim was saying. What a year. From October of 1862 to September of 1863, you've got, the Kentucky campaign. You've got them moving, as Jim said, back toward the Nashville area. They're going to fight Stones River, the Battle of Fredericksburg. Oh yeah, Chancellorsville and Gettysburg and Vicksburg, all going on during this amount of time. And what this is all going to set up is, of course, the costliest battle ever fought in the Western Theater, the second costliest battle ever fought in the Civil War, the Battle of Chickamauga. And we'll be posting numerous videos about this from various areas around the field. Now, we're going to start walking here, but I want to give anybody else a chance to say anything else. You guys good?
Well, let me just actually kind of set up our walk here. Not only is this site important because it is Rosecrans headquarters, but there's also a large source of water here. And this campaign for Chattanooga unfolds in a year-long drought. And even the larger springs in this region were beginning to flow at a lower level. And in a lot of ways, you can say that Rosecrans' advance was a march from one spring to another. A standard Union division has about 5,000 men in it in this campaign, 2,000 animals. That means that they need 13,000 gallons of water a day, a gallon per man and 4 gallons per animal. And that's 4 canteens of water for a soldier. And so in some ways, Rosecrans' army has literally marched from one spring to another in this advance. And now, as he's consolidating, water is a critical factor. And here there's a large spring, which is the reason the Gordon family located their farm here. But there is a large spring, Crawfish Spring, which was the landmark for this area at the time. And the Rosecrans army, as it marches up out of the mountains, out of McLemore's Cove, it is passing by here, and most of the Union troops are going to take an opportunity to stop and fill their canteens at Crawfish Springs. Now, as we move, you might see there are some cannon and there are some tablets here on the grounds of the Gordon Lee Mansion, now owned by the city of Chickamauga. And you might say, gee, these look similar to the ones you see on the Chickamauga battlefield. Well, they are. They're exactly the same. In fact, in the original version of the National Military Park, which we'll hear a little bit more about in a couple of minutes, the veterans hoped that this area would be part of the National Military Park. And even though this ground was not added into the National Military Park, they did erect monuments, markers, tablets, and plaques here to tell those parts of the campaign and battle that unfolded on this ground. And you can read a little bit about the hospitals here, as well as the battle action that occurs here on September the 20th, the final day of the battle. But we're going down slope now to that most critical asset for the Union Army at the time of the Battle of Chickamauga, and that is water and Crawfish Springs. This large spring, which is part of the city of Chickamauga's water system today, is a critical part of the story. Most Union soldiers are going to fight the battle on the single quart of water that they have at the beginning of their engagement, whether that is on September the 18th, 19th, or 20th, and they met for the majority of them, they have filled that canteen here at Crawfish Spring. And as you look here to my right, you can see the outlet of the spring there at the base of the rock, and can imagine those thousands of Union soldiers stopping here to fill their canteens. Teamsters with their buckets to carry water up to their teams that have stopped on the road up there. Just the value of this water to the Union Army.
And not only to the Union Army, thanks Jim, but imagine if, you're fighting in battle, it's a hot day, you're already parched and whatnot. And then imagine you're in that battle, you're already parched, and then imagine you're wounded. What are you going to really want? So let me bring on our good friend. You've seen him before. This is Dr. Anthony Hodges. He is president of the Tennessee Civil War Preservation Association.
Good job, Gary. Glad y'all are here. Always glad to have you in the West. As Gary said, this is, or as Jim said earlier, this is the major Union Army water source. The Confederates, of course, advanced across Chickamauga Creek, and they can set up their treatment facilities along the creek where there's a readily water source. This is the main water source for the Union Army, and as a result, 7 to 9 division hospitals will set up. This becomes a vast hospital complex during the battle. So this also causes trouble as Rosecrans advances north and tries to stop Bragg's attempt to cut him off from Chattanooga. Most of his hospitals end up on the extreme right wing of his army, and when the Confederates break through, that is trouble for the men in these hospitals. Jim?
Yeah, eventually on the final day of the battle, as the Union Army has to retreat back towards Chattanooga, the medical personnel here try to put as many of the wounded as they can on the road. Those who can walk are directed to walk. They, with the available ambulances and wagons, they load up as many more who can stand transportation. However, there are still hundreds of wounded Union soldiers who are going to be left in this field hospital at the end of the battle and captured by the Confederates. 2,500 wounded Federal soldiers will come into Bragg's hands as a result of the Battle of Chickamauga. And one of those large concentrations was all the hospitals, and those division hospitals were located as much as a mile away from Crawfish Springs. But the landmark used by all of the participants was Crawfish Springs. Why? It's the water, the one resource those hospitals can't do without. So.
I'm always Chris Mikowski from Emerging Civil War. I'm delighted to be here, and how exciting to be with legendary Jim Ogden. This is super exciting. Jim, I'm going to pick your brain here in a second. I'm always interested in coming to a site that it starts out before the battle as a headquarters for the Union Army, and it becomes a hospital afterwards, and the sublime juxtaposition of those functions. Jim, I want to ask you, how's Rosecrans feeling on the eve of battle, where he had a tough time in Murfreesboro? He had a pretty ingenious time through the Tullahoma campaign, for which he gets no credit. Don't forget about this battle just because it's not written in letters of blood. And now he's being harassed because he's not moving fast enough. How's he feeling on the eve of battle?
Well, Rosecrans has had a number of ups and downs. He originally thought that crossing the Tennessee River would have been a difficult task in and of itself, and he really only envisioned his initial movement in late August as taking him across the river. But he got across the river easily, so he pushed on. But then Bragg now is pushing back. And Rosecrans, you can kind of see the engineer in him. he's really kind of reached beyond where he has thought things out. And he's had a couple of days now where he's been, where he's surrendered the initiative to Braxton Bragg, and he has really been just reconsolidating. But beginning on the 15th, he and George Thomas have begun talking about potentially taking the offensive once again. The Assistant Secretary of War, Charles Dana, who is here, will telegraph back to Washington along the telegraph line that has been run down here to the Gordon Mansion. Will telegraph back to Washington that Rosecrans is talking about swinging around to the end of the Pigeon Mountain Range. So he's now kind of going back up again, rising again, thinking about really taking the initiative once again. But he has begun to do that thing that so many leaders tragically do, and that he has done at Murfreesboro and at Corinth, and that is not take care of himself. He is not sleeping, going day after day with little or no sleep, and that is going to become a critical aspect for the final day of the Battle of Chickamauga.
And I want to look at things on the Confederate side for just a second, because Braxton Bragg has also had a tumultuous few months. We can take that all the way back to Kentucky, and he has had squabbling in the high command, which we're going to come back to time and time again during this visit here at Chickamauga. He's had squabbling in his high command, so he's really had some issues with command and control. He's had to then retreat through Middle Tennessee from being outmaneuvered. Tullahoma campaign. He's kind of has to give up Chattanooga here and try to salvage that situation. And as Jim mentioned earlier, he sees an opportunity, but this is on the heels of a lot of trouble for Braxton Bragg.
Right, and those troubles have continued just in the last few days in McLemore's Cove, and at the same time, he's received those reinforcements from Mississippi and East Tennessee, and now word of more coming from Virginia, which has emboldened Braxton Bragg to take the offensive. The question is, does he have the tool to execute the plan that he has developed?
I kind of like this too. I kind of say Virginia, and maybe in the Gettysburg movie it's Virginia, and all of a sudden he's sort of like Virginia, which is kind of very interesting as well. Feel free to comment on that. Instead of about our windscreen, yes, it's still there. You're with the American Battlefield Trust. Gary Edelman here. That's Chris Mikowski behind the camera. It's Jim Ogden, and here we have Dr. Anthony Hodges back with us again too. Dr. Hodges, what does barbecue have to do with the Chattanooga and Chickamauga National Military Park?
Chickamauga and Chattanooga.
Oh my God!
National Military Park.
I'm sorry, I messed up.
Chickamauga, Chattanooga.
My apologies, guys.
Still Virginia.
I messed that up a couple of times. You must have allowed me to do it before, and then you did it. There we go. Thank you, guys. So
They're in chronological order, Gary, if that helps.
Hey, well, maybe I should learn a little bit more about the Civil War. Anyway, we want to learn about what barbecue had to do with it, and man, wouldn't it be great if anything remained from said barbecue?
Yes, it would. Actually, we've heard about the wartime significance of this site. This is a very important site in relation to the formation of Chickamauga and Chattanooga National Military Park, the nation's first, and I believe we are still the largest of the national military parks. In 1889, in preparation for an Army of the Cumberland reunion, two former officers of the Army of the Cumberland, Henry Van Ness Boynton and Frederick Vanderveer, are writing about the old battlefield, and an idea occurs to Boynton. Let's make this into a park like they're doing at Gettysburg. But Gettysburg is a private effort at that time, and Boynton said, let's involve the federal government in this. And even yet, let's invite the Confederates to participate. So at the 1889 Army of the Cumberland barbecue or reunion, they send out invitations to many of the Confederates in the area, in North Georgia, the Chattanooga area. The men of the Army of the Cumberland come here to Crawfish Springs. There are 30 250-foot tables. We've got a couple of shots here. Here are the empty tables, 7,500 square feet or board feet of table space. At each veteran's place, nearly 20,000 veterans of both sides will attend. At each veteran's place, there is not only his barbecue, but a small pipe made of wood cut from the Chickamauga battlefield. Its stem is made from reed that grew along the bottom of Chickamauga Creek. As they finish their barbecue, the veterans actually will smoke the pipe of peace. This is, as far as we know, the only existing pipe of peace from the Great Barbecue of 1889. Wow. This was brought back by a Georgia veteran from Milledgeville. Apparently, he chose not to smoke the pipe of peace. You can see it was never used. I don't know if that means he was unreconstructed or not. But the veterans, after they smoke the pipe of peace, will retire to a nearby church where they form the Chickamauga Memorial Association. They will use their veterans' clout to get the legislation into Congress, passed in 1890, and the park is dedicated in 1895. Here is the invitation that was sent out to the barbecue. You can see there used to be a wheel here at Crawfish Springs. It's in, I believe if you look in the old sketches and battles and leaders, you will see that wheel. Here are our pipes of peace. Inside we have our program. Chattanooga welcomes the blue and gray to the barbecue to be given on Veterans Day. He tells how they will smoke the pipe of peace. John B. Gordon will speak on behalf of the South, even though he is not at this battle, but he has been Senator and Governor of Georgia. William Rosecrans will return to the old battlefield and speak on behalf of the Union veterans. This is where Chickamauga Park is conceived, here at Crawfish Springs. So not only is it important to the wartime story of the Battle of Chickamauga, it's a really very important part to what we in the American Battlefield Trust does. In many ways, you can say this is the birthplace of the battlefield preservation movement.
Well, that's interesting. So I know you have a couple other things,
Yes.
but let me just say that it did not go unnoticed. And if Jim Lighthizer, if you're watching, the idea of bringing the federal government in as a partner, something the trust does a lot. Jim, you stole that from the blue and gray barbecue. So, sorry, go ahead.
This is just a couple of ribbons. This is the actual, each veteran was given this paper ribbon. That's his admission ticket. This one was actually used by a man named William Blackwell. He was a native Chattanoogan, was too old to be drafted, but volunteered into the Confederate Army and fought in the Battle of Chickamauga. He attended the barbecue with his son in 1889. This is another ribbon worn by a Confederate veteran who would have attended the barbecue in 1889.
Super cool. And just because I know it's coming, there's something I have to say, sorry. When you have your own collection, you can choose to keep things in sleeves and never bring them out of your house, and you can treat those items how you would like, and other people are allowed to curate their collection in the way they would like by bringing these things out to where they were actually used in the first place. Sorry, I had to do that.
That's okay. These are teaching tools. Besides artifact, these are teaching tools. If you leave them in your house, you don't, and if you're like my family, they're tired of it. They don't want to learn a thing. They've been looking at it their whole life. So I like to bring it out for people that are interested can benefit from it as well.
Well, thank you, sir, for that. To you, thank you. Let me give any last words to Jim if you have them.
Well, I just want to say that, to emphasize what Anthony said, this was a joint venture by veterans of both sides, and it reflects that spirit of reconciliation and reunification that is spreading throughout so much of the United States at the time, and which will be so prevalent in the veterans movements of the 1890s in particular. Now, yes, Carrie, it is indeed only reconciliation to some level or some limit, but it truly was something felt by the veterans to literally show not only the country, but also the world, that the United States, once divided, is now reunited as we step out onto the world stage of the soon-to-be 20th century.
Great, Jim. Thank you so much. And by the way, is that water safe? Because I just tasted it. Do you think it's okay?
Yeah. Yes.
Okay, good. Okay, that sounds great. This is a substantial spring. I hope some of you all are seeing it. Sorry, some of y'all are seeing this for the first time. I really appreciate you joining us. Remember, we were here 3.5 years ago where we shot a whole lot of Chickamauga videos. I almost did it again for the 155th. Here we are at the 159th coming up this year, and we hope you'll check out the old videos and wait till you see we have what we have coming for you. Thanks, Chris. Thanks, Anthony. Thanks, Jim, and thank you all for watching and supporting Battlefield Preservation and Education.